Welcome to Using OneNote in Education. This will be an introductory information session explaining the purpose of how we can go about using OneNote in education, providing you with a few key takeaways and how we can make the most of digital learning moving forward. First, to give you a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover in today's session. So I'm going to give you a short introduction to who I am and kind of where I'm from, what we intend on delivering today. There'll be a brief explanation on what OneNote and Teams are to try and get everyone up to the same speed. And then we'll move on to why you should actually use them. A small kind of explanation, for a better word, as to what the purpose of them are and how you can make the use of them in your classroom, and then why you should make the use of them. Then I'll start to give you some examples on the kind of things you can make using OneNote and Teams in education. This will link into long-term content planning, the ideas of building a top copy, the link between OneNote and Teams, moving into some assessment and differentiation, finally rounding off with a few key takeaways. So, as a bit of an introduction, my name is Joshua Brown. I am a teacher of business predominantly at Samuel Ryder Academy in St Albans. I have a few other titles under there. I'm what's called a Digital Technology Champion and a STEM Ambassador. What the Digital Technology Champion basically means is that I'm one of the individuals in school who leads on training scenarios and things like this to help other people improve their use of digital technology in education. Being a STEM Ambassador, part of my role is to link together the different areas under the STEM brand and try and make sure they're embedded throughout a variety of different lessons and make sure we are best preparing our students for the kind of future world they're going to go to. Samuel Ryder Academy, the school that I currently work at, is an all-through school in St Albans, meaning we have students all the way from reception all the way up to year 13. That provides us a very unique situation in which we can use digital technology throughout all areas and kind of get a good understanding of how and where to pitch it. Finally, Samuel Ryder Academy is an Apple school. We are an Apple distinguished school as well, meaning we have a one-to-one device system using Apple products for all students within the school. We also, as I said, are a regional training centre, meaning we put on sessions like this to help our trust and also those in the wider trust develop their use of digital technology within their own settings. So, what are OneNote and Teams? Now, a lot of you will already know what Teams is from the use of things like Google Classroom, Teams, Skype, Zoom during the pandemic. We as teachers got very good very quickly at delivering an online curriculum. And in some settings, this skill was used, it was done amazingly well, and it's been put back on the back foot. What we've done is continue to embed it in all of our lessons and try and take the next step. And that's where OneNote really comes in. So, in my opinion, OneNote and Teams are probably two of the most useful future-focused tools that you can have at your disposal, especially when trying to create a digital learning experience. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on what Teams is. I know most of us have used it or used a very similar system like it. But some of the key things I want to highlight is that not only can you remotely teach, but the use of being able to set assignments, digitally record grades, and store important class materials is something that, moving forward from the pandemic and how we can introduce digital learning into our work, is really useful. Now, this links really nicely with a tool called OneNote. Some of you may have used it, some of you may have had some experience with it, and some of you may have not. So to give you a bit of an overview, it is a digital notebook tool. Imagine your student's notebook that they might have in their bag or that you give them at the start of the year, except it's digital. It's on their iPad or it's on a Chromebook or whatever your students may be using. With that, you can create interactive digital lessons that students can answer either written via typing or written using a pen and a stylus and the draw function within the app. They can then complete these assigned tasks, work collaboratively, or generally complete free-flowing notes, which helps all different levels of the school. Depending on which level I create my OneNote pages for, We edit how much work we put into the actual sheet for them so that they can progress and work through with it. So why should you use OneNote and Teams? First things first, it will save you money. Now that sounds a little bit contradictory because I'm saying students will be needing a one-to-one device system. But if I'm honest, that's the way most schools are going forward. So that's more of a given. What I mean by it's going to save you money in your departments, in your settings, is in printing costs. One of the biggest costs every school has is the funding on their printing. And as department leaders, those of you who are, will be able to look and see your printing budgets and how much it costs you each year. By being able to simply upload sources or screenshots of different parts of work, or the image for art, for example, that the students are going to copy from, to a OneNote page and deliver it to the students, can save the teacher so much money in terms of printing costs. And it's a great way to also be much more environmentally friendly moving forward. Moving on then, it's accessible. Our students are often better than us at using devices. They understand how they work. And from a business perspective, that is how they'll work when they get into the real world. So being able to use their devices to change certain things on there and make it better for them helps massively improve their learning. This links really nicely into the adaptability side of it. There are many embedded tools, not just on iPads, but also within OneNote itself, to change background colors, change the size of text so it's easier for certain students to see. You can edit and use links to certain things to help give prompts to students who may need a little bit more support, but might not need you to give a whole different differentiated answer. You can add certain things in there to make it adaptable for higher end learners without, again, you as the teacher having to provide a whole separate piece of work. Moving on, they are connective. As I said, OneNote can embed within Teams, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on that later. But there is a point in which you can essentially create your assignment in OneNote, link it through to Teams, and automatically create a gradebook for yourself in your Teams gradebooks, meaning that other than marking it and setting the assignment, all of that extra work that as teachers takes us time can easily be navigated away, which again leads very nicely onto time saving. I'm not going to lie, creating a whole OneNote curriculum for your students is not quick. It takes a while to understand and learn how to use it, and then to learn how to use it to its highest level of perfection, it takes even longer. But once that's done, the time you save is phenomenal. From speaking from experience, once I've made my OneNotes for my classes, other than maintaining them throughout the year, I have my sets of lessons done, worksheets done, homeworks prepared, exams done from the start of September. One of the things I've created, and I'll show you an example of later, is a set of revision materials that is 30 lessons long. So it comes to revision time in the exams, and I distribute these lessons to my students, meaning that rather than trying to work out what I'm going to teach next, or plan this next bit of lesson or adapt, I have 30 lessons worth of things there. I can purely focus on actually being in the room and being with my students, helping with their direct needs. And lastly, course maintenance. Being an online collaborative digital tool, you can edit your lessons as you need them. You can edit little bits of the worksheet or slightly tinker with something as it goes through, meaning that that time of having to go from one location to the other and completely repeat them all is saved. You don't have to worry about having something printed and it becoming out of date. You just go back onto OneNote and change it. So, as I said, I'm going to go through a few of the different ways that we can do certain things with OneNote and Teams. So on this slide, you can see an example of our long-term content planning. Now, there's a bit of a snapshot down the left of my GCSE business OneNote. On there, you can see all of my lessons by my units. And then, for example, for my first unit, you can see the different lessons as they go there. In each one, what you are looking at on the page a little bit next to it is what we call the overview. Now, this is where, as a teacher, I store my key lesson topics, the websites the students may need to be able to help them get to certain things, revision videos for them to look in afterwards, as well as news articles, so they can relate their work to real-world content. There's also the lesson PowerPoint there for me to use to teach. and an exam question PowerPoint with all of a variety of exam questions for them to use. Now, obviously, this is all material I've created. So as I said, not always the quickest thing to create, and a lot of times it's pulling together from other resources. However, once that's done, I send this bank of lessons out on the first day I arrive in my GCSE class, and I then don't have to plan the lessons. I don't have to think about sending out different materials or uploading new materials because it is all already done. To show you what this looks like in action. So this is an example of my same Microsoft OneNote that you can see there. I've got a collaboration space, which is something we'll go into a little bit later, content library and a teacher only section. Now this, as you can see at the top here, is what's called a class notebook. Now a class notebook is a bank notebook in which it houses all of your students, if it's set up that way, or in the case of this one, is what we call a top copy, which is essentially a file and store system creating for all of the lessons for, in this case, my GCSE business topic. As you can see, there's the different top copies as we go through, and also the individual classes. Now, unfortunately, due to GDPR, I can't show you the individual classes because they have my individual student names on there. But we'll spend some time looking at the top copy itself. So you can create your sections for the different parts. So as you can see, I've got an assessment and revision section, a section for my departmental documentation, some extra project lessons that we plan, and then our lessons by unit. Now, in the GCSE topic for business, there are 10 units. As you can see, each one has its own section. If I go into the first one to show you, what we have is a complete lesson plan that is an active worksheet for the students to use with the questions they want to answer that link to, as we saw a second ago, the PowerPoints all linked through. What this means is the students have access to, at the touch of their fingers, exactly what we're going to cover in this lesson, an exact level of where to get helpful websites from, and revision videos, meaning that for some of the students who may struggle a little bit but not need you to be giving a ton of explanation, you can do a simple level of differentiation to say, go and have a look at the BBC Bite Size page, or go and have a look at X page or Y page. If students are at home and they're still struggling to work out a little bit of homework, well, they've got the revision video there. If the students are coming back to look at these lessons for a revision and they haven't maybe wrote the title down properly, well, that's fine. The title's done for them. The topics are there and they know exactly what was covered in this section. And as you can see, we break ours down into do now activities to start off the lesson. We all know technology doesn't work itself always as quick as possible. So by having do now activities come in and establishing good routines, my students know to walk in the room, load up the do now activity for whatever lesson I've said they're on next, and start that. So by the time everything's loaded and we're ready to go, they've done their do now activity, I've done the register, and then we're getting cracking on task one. And we move on so through. We can inbuild extensions, and finally in their plenaries. Now, obviously this looks very colourful and very well done. This, as I said, wasn't the first thing I created. It wasn't the start. Lessons evolved to this point. By using templates and creating banks of how we want our lessons to look, we were able to prepare and make these a lot easier. When I was first learning how to use OneNote in Teams, I'll be honest, it probably took me about 30 or 40 minutes to write up a lesson. Admittedly, at the same time, I was also a trainee, so I've got to be given a little bit of credit for it. However, now, with the understanding of the lesson planning there and being developed in doing it, I can create an effective lesson in under about 10 minutes. And it's prepared there, ready for the students. As you can see, it goes through. We also create homeworks. This was an exam question homework I created for them, as well as getting some news articles and getting them to post a link as well as a summary. We can create pre-recorded revision resources. So this is my heading page for it, and I have a key terms list for them. We have a host of more exam questions that they haven't been able to answer and see yet. And then also pre-created knowledge organizers that they can work through. Again, meaning all of those resources are at the top of my hand. Now, as you can see, I've planned this for all of the lessons as we go through. But we've also created assessment. So we have assessment areas that I've created, all my different assessments as we go throughout the year. Now, you can ignore my little numbering system. That's just because I like it being numbered a certain way. But I've created pre-made assessment templates. So our questions for that template go here, as you can see, for example, on this one. So they're there in a Word document. The students will come into the lesson, they open that Word document. I have a tool that I can lock their iPads into that page. They answer their questions and they'll upload the images of their questions there. I can then digitally mark these questions and then add in marked feedback and the grade. We've created a mark scheme tracker there so I can highlight and show exactly where they're at. I can give a comment and I've got a ready-made EBI there depending on what their weakest area was. Finally, they've got their green pen response button to put on there. Now in a second I'll show you how we can link this through with Teams, meaning that it's all in one place. So that's kind of how the long-term content planning can work. First, I'm going to move on to a little bit of talking about how you build a top copy. So one thing that I kind of bristled over earlier is that I'm talking about OneNote, but I'm creating a class notebook. Now, OneNote is an individual document. Now, OneNote in itself, if you was to create one, it would be just for you. It would be a notes section that you can do everything I just showed you. But obviously, only you could see it. A class notebook is just a collaborative version of it, and you will have access to both if you have the Microsoft 365 suite. So all you need to do, as it says on the presentation, is open up Microsoft 365 and then go to Class Notebook using apps to show you how that works. As you can see here on Microsoft 365, I would go to apps, scroll down to see all the different applications, and they are there with the All Apps button. And you can see Class Notebook is there at the top. By pressing that, as you just saw on the presentation, it gives the same option. At this point, you can create your own class notebook. It is very simple. The guide here is very good at explaining it. However, just by pressing Create Class Notebook and going through it, it will very simply explain exactly how for you to create a class notebook. What we suggest you create is what we call a top copy. Now, as I showed you with my GCSE one, that's a copy in which has no students, but just teachers in it. So I create that copy, do it once, and then all of the lessons are stored and created in there. From there, you can actually distribute those lessons to other class books you've created using a class book distribution tool, which we'll go into a little bit more in one of the later videos. Using this tool, you can then send these lessons to the other students in the different classes. Or, for example, if one person takes charge of your GCSE curriculum and maybe one takes charge of your A-level, but both teachers teach both of those areas, you can still distribute across without issue. This means that you can send to multiple different classes and they've all got the same lesson and are up to the same place, helping keep that level of curriculum the same across a variety of different teachers. The reason we suggest building a top copy is for some IT departments like to individually create the year groups each year, which does work quite nicely. What that means is once you remove the set of the notebooks after that year group's left you, you could potentially be in a position where you would have lost all of that work you created for them. So by creating a top copy that you keep for yourself and distributing from there, this never happens. So to give you a little bit more example of what happens when you create a class notebook, it will give you these options: naming the notebook, adding the teachers to it. As I said, with a top copy, I wouldn't add students to it as it's not needed. You can go back at a later date and add more teachers and even remove teachers if new teachers join or leave your department as it works. One thing you can't do at a later date is change the name of your class notebook. As you see with some of my notebooks, as we're still in the process of updating and moving forward, we're moving away from some of the terminology we used and just literally naming them essentially what they are. So, for example, Key Stage 3 Business or GCSE Business. That just makes life a little bit easier for you moving forward. So what's the link between OneNote and Teams, and why am I talking about them at the same time? So once you've started to develop your top copy and maybe develop some of those assessments like I showed you, you're all very used to what Teams looks like already. And I expect a number of you have probably already used the assignment tool during COVID or maybe during your actual lessons with Teams. What you can do when it goes down to the bottom on Teams and it says, what resource would you like to attach? You can attach that class's inbuilt class notebook. You can go into there, find a page you've created, for example, the assessment pages, as you can see examples of my screen, and you can get them to upload pictures straight from their work onto their OneNote page. They never have to even load up Teams. You can then EBI feedback on this work and give it a digital grade. That will then store in your gradebook. And as a result of that, you will have a running gradebook and not have to create your own Excel link and jump backwards and forwards or have your own mark book anymore. It automatically creates it for you. It also automatically creates it for you in a place where you can see EBI responses. Meaning if you're like my school and there's a lot of wanting to make sure we know that kids have responded to each and every question, you have it right there. If anybody ever wants to see it, it's in the same places where your grades are. You don't need to load up multiple documents or come in with 4 or 5 different examples. It's all in the same place. Moving on a little bit then to the levels of how we can use simple differentiation. So as you can see on this, for some reason I've just noticed the wording hasn't come through, but it's fine. We'll brush blastly past it. You can see on the image, which is the more important part anyway, that the actual documentation on there has those key websites, revision videos, and news articles. Again, that's not going to be enough for all students, but helping some of those that are just struggling a little bit, that need that extra tiny bit of support without the whole lesson being changed, you can create that level of differentiation for them. You can have that at the right place. And through a small amount of training, you can point students directly in that direction for them. Another example is this. You can create targeted pages of either of these specific students. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a cross-notebook distribution system to deliver from a top copy across. However, for example, if you know that there was an individual in your class that was going to need a bit more support or going to need a little bit more help than just the actual communication from you, you might be able to just create them a small bit of information like you can see on my page here and just distribute that to their individual notebook, or maybe create a school group of 3 or 4 students and just distribute that to their notebook. As it says, it enables that kind of covert assistance to targeted students, creating the lessons that support their needs without devaluing or making them feel like they're needing all of this additional help. Because as far as they're aware, it's on everyone's OneNote. It's there for all of them. Now, what I tend to do is actually make this differentiation available for all of my students. The difference I make is that when I'm walking around the room, I will point students to it more targetedly than others in more of a covert way. There are some students who I know won't need it, just because I don't think they need it on that task. There might be a task that they do need it on. So having it accessible for all makes it that little bit easier. But as I said, if you wanted to make slightly targeted worksheets that work better, because that was the need one of your students had, you would be able to do this. So, key takeaways, and you'll notice this goes back to the same points as I made earlier. By using OneNote and Teams, you can create a very basic curriculum that houses your entire work for your classes and your students. Flicking back to some of these lessons that I showed you earlier, all of it's there. The photos that the students would want to be looking at. If you've got a classroom where some of the students won't be able to see the board without moving, and I put these pictures on the board, they're going to get very difficult. They might have to get up and move. With OneNote, your students don't have to do that. It's in front of them. If you're asking your students to, for example, read through something, now this saves you printing all of that off. And if some of the students have worse eyesight than others, and they're like, "Sir, miss, that's too small for me to see," well, you can zoom in on an iPad. You can zoom in on a computer. You can make it easier for them to understand. If they go a step further and then they say, "Well, okay, I've only been able to print off one between 2 of this document, so I don't want you writing on it." With OneNote, you don't have that issue. Everyone has their own copy. And by using the draw tool that I explained earlier, you can highlight wherever you may need to. You can make it clear for your students. You can underline certain things. And again, if it's needed, they can remove it. In my opinion, OneNote and Teams are the future of how we're going to be teaching students. Now, it's going to look different in every classroom. For me, in business, it's much easier to do them answering online approach with typing out their answers into the boxes. Because, as I said earlier, business is moving digital based. There are very often opportunities in the real world of business in which they involve actual physical writing. But for English, for example, they need to be able to write those long answer essays. They need to be able to be writing constantly and being able to practice that handwriting. So instead of having it wrote like that, you could, for example, create a page that looks slightly differently. For example, with squared paper if you're doing it in maths, or thin lines for the older year groups. So you've got younger year groups like primary, well, there you've got thicker lines that they can write on using a digital stylus. Now, as I'm showing you this on my laptop, I'm not going to attempt to try and write words down because my ability to use the trackpad to write is awful. However, using an iPad, you'd very easily be able to draw and write on this screen. You can change backgrounds to different modes. You can add windows. And one of the really useful tools for some students who struggle to fully understand by reading information is if you put a block of text down, for example, this text here, you can use an immersive reader tool to allow it to read out. This will read everything there for your students and help them to understand what's going on. If you have a student with EAL, there is a translate tool built in. Now, with all translators, they don't always work perfectly, but it is there for your students. Having all of this at your fingertips negates the need for multiple different apps and will help you be able to be a more efficient teacher. As we go on, a lot of departments now want information to be able to be delivered at the fingertips of the students. For example, we have something called Scholar, which is how we deliver certain things. So we can show our students, in all of our students' OneNotes, how all of our different parts of business link to Scholar. There was an exam format document I made a few years ago, is now embedded into my students' OneNotes. So they all get it at the beginning. Careers and skills students can go on and move on for. Wider reading lists, links to different kind of internet resources the students can use. And everything we need to a point where there's course details, exactly what the course is made up of. This makes it all in one place for our students. This makes it easy for our students to access. And once made, makes it easy for us to teach. Especially for those of you who are in smaller subjects that end up having to use a lot of part-time or non-subject specialist teachers to teach your work. This saves so much effort for them as they don't have to worry about learning all these new systems about trying to get PowerPoints to work and how to submit certain things. It's all done in one place. As I said, I strongly believe this is the future of teaching for all of our students. And with the more digital technology that we invest into, the better outcomes we'll get for our students, especially with exam boards starting to say that they are using and allowing the use of computers in their exams. I hope this has given you a nice overview into OneNote and Teams and how you can use them in education. There will be later videos on these going into particular areas in more detail and hopefully explain certain things. As I said, my name was Joshua Brown, working at Samuel Ryder Academy. If you'd like any more information about any of this, please get in touch with us. We are more than happy to support. Thank you very much for listening.